Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I suggest we start. We're waiting for the representative from Chad. We were together at an event on Central African Republic 5 minutes ago, probably on his way. But I suggest we start. First, thank you very much for your attendance. This is a very important panel, very important topic. As you know, the Sudan conflict is the world's fastest growing displacement crisis and one of the largest protection crises that the world is facing today. 7 million people forcibly displaced within Sudan and across borders. Sudan now has the largest number of internally displaced persons globally, with close to 5.3 million new IDPs since the start of the conflict. Within just 5 months, the number of refugees and returnees forced to flee Sudan into neighboring countries had reached 1 million people. By comparison, it was 2 years into the Syria crisis when the number of refugees reached 1 million. The impact of this crisis is expected, unfortunately, to be long-lasting and set Sudan development back years, according to the IMF. According to the World Bank, the economy of Sudan is expected to contract by over 12% in 2023. The armed conflict has damaged the country's industrial base and led to a collapse in economic activities nationwide, with detrimental impact on food security and forced displacement. By comparison, the economies of Yemen and Syria shrunk by about 5% per year on average in the last decade. Without a resolution to the war, many hundreds of thousands of people will be forced to flee across international borders in search of safety and basic assistance. If the conflict continues, peace and stability across the region will also be at stake. Already impoverished communities at the border are the first responders to this crisis. Development investment are urgently needed to strengthen national systems such as health and education for refugees and hosts to avoid the creation of parallel and unsustainable refugee response models. Development investments are similarly needed in the areas where refugees who had been hosted by Sudan are returning home. This is especially true in South Sudan, where large numbers of returnees are coming back to areas that lack the necessary social services. Their return is only a solution if we are able to invest in education, in health, in livelihood activities to make their return sustainable. Finally, we have distributed business cards with QR codes to access our operational data portal on the Sudan situation and a special story map that highlights the critical needs across the region. I would like now to start the panel discussion. I will introduce the panel members. It is first His Excellency Ambassador Hamid Hassan Hamid, Permanent Representative of Sudan to the United Nations in Geneva. He will be followed by His Excellency Mr. Albino Akol Atak, with Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Disasters Management of South Sudan. He will then be followed by Ambassador Dr. Jean-Pierre Baptiste, Permanent Representative of Chad to the United Nations in Geneva. Then he will be followed by Ambassador Dr. Ahmed Gamaledine, Permanent Representative of the Arab Republic of Egypt to the United Nations in Geneva. We will then have Mr. Yero Balde, who is the Director of the Transition State Coordination Office at the African Development Bank, Mrs. Erika Gesteren, who is the Director, Human Development, Migration, Governance, and Peace at the European Union International Union International Partnerships, Mr. Abdi Abdullahi, who is the Manager of Resilience and Fragility Division at the Islamic Development Bank. I'll stop here and give the floor now to His Excellency Hassan Hamid.
شكرا جزيلا. تحية أولا لجميع المشاركين من السادة رؤساء الوفود من الوزراء والسادة السفراء وجميع ممثلي المنظمات والوكالات الإنسانية والأممية المهتمة بشأن بلدي السودان. السادة الحضور الكريم، في البدء نتقدم بالشكر والتقدير لجهود المفوضية السامية للاجئين في الاستجابة للأوضاع الإنسانية الطارئة التي ظل يعيشها الشعب السوداني منذ اندلاع تمرد ميليشيا الجنجويد التي شنت حربا على السودان وشعبه. كما نشكر المفوضية السامية وكافة الدول المانحة المشاركة في هذه الفعالية لتسليط الضوء على أزمة النزوح القسري في السودان واللجوء القسري أيضا إلى بعض دول جواره بسبب هذه الحرب اللعينة. استمرت الميليشيا المتمردة طيلة الثمانية أشهر الماضية في سلسلة الجرائم والانتهاكات ضد الشعب السوداني من قتل وترهيب ونهب واغتصاب وتخريب ممنهج للبنية التحتية، بالإضافة إلى عمليات التهجير القسري بصورة منهجية بهدف إحداث تحول ديمغرافي في السودان. وكما تابعتم فقد بلغت الخروقات ذروتها في غرب السودان، تحديدا في ولاية غرب دارفور، وقد شاهدتم جميعا عمليات التطهير العرقي التي ارتكبتها الميليشيا ضد قبيلة المساليت في غرب دارفور، مما دفع المزيد من السودانيين لعبور الحدود إلى دولة شاد الشقيقة. هنا أعرب وفي هذا الصدد عن بالغ شكر وتقدير السودان لكافة دول جواره المباشر التي فتحت حدودها للاجئين بعد أن أجبر الملايين من شعبنا العزيز على النزوح داخليا إلى داخل الولايات في السودان، بجانب نزوح ما يزيد على 1,000,000 إلى خارج السودان. وبذلك أصبحت أعداد النازحين داخليا في السودان هي الأعلى في العالم. أود أن أشير إلى أن عبء استضافة هذه الأعداد الكبيرة من النازحين داخليا قد وضع على عاتق المجتمعات المضيفة التي تعاني هي الأخرى من ظروف اقتصادية هشة وأوضاع معيشية حرجة، حيث أن الأعداد أصبحت أكبر أضعاف المرات من الطاقة الاستيعابية للمرافق الخدمية، خاصة المرافق الصحية. ولعل الحضور جميعا قد تابعوا ما حاق وما لحق بالنظام الصحي في السودان من استهداف ممنهج تحولت على إثره العديد من المستشفيات والمرافق الصحية إلى مقار عسكرية للميليشيا المتمردة. أود كذلك أن أؤكد على أن الولايات السودانية التي هاجر إليها النازحين داخليا هي في الأساس تفتقر إلى معظم الخدمات والبنى التحتية الكافية بالأساس، كما تعاني من النقص الحاد في الغذاء والمياه الصالحة للشرب، هذا في ظل أيضا انهيار النظام البنكي وانتشار الأوبئة في البلاد. لا بد للفاعلين في مجال التنمية من العمل على تحسين البنية التحتية والعمل في مجال الزراعة والرعي والتصدير والتعليم والصحة ودعم المشاريع الصغيرة والمتوسطة، والعمل كذلك على تعزيز الاعتماد والاكتفاء الذاتي للنازحين وذلك على المدى البعيد. لا بد لي كذلك من هذا المنبر من أن أدعو كافة الدول وتحديدا دول الاتحاد الأوروبي وكافة الحكومات التي سبق أن جمدت الدعم التنموي للسودان إلى أن تعيد النظر في هذه السياسات فورا في ظل الظروف الراهنة التي يمر بها السودان، لأن مثل هذا الإجراء لن يتضرر منه سوى المواطن السوداني في المقام الأول. كما أن تسييس الدعم التنموي أمر غير مجدي ولن يسهم إلا في تعقيد الأوضاع المعقدة أصلا ليس في السودان فحسب بل في جميع دول الحزام السوداني التي تمتد من القرن الأفريقي وإلى تخوم غرب أفريقيا. كذلك فإن استمرار الوضع على ما هو عليه سيضطر ملايين من النازحين الإضافيين واللاجئين الذين يفتقرون إلى حقوقهم الأساسية في الغذاء والمياه النظيفة والصحة والتعليم والحماية إلى الهجرة أيضا واللجوء، فيما نشهد بالفعل زيادة أعداد السودانيين الذين أجبروا على الهجرة غير المنظمة، وهذه تضاعفت أمواج المهاجرين هجرة غير منظمة عبر حدود السودان الغربية ومنها إلى شمال أفريقيا بهدف عبور المحيط إلى حيث الأمن الذي ينشدون. كما نشهد بالفعل زيادة أعداد السودانيين الذين يهاجرون أيضا داخليا يوما بعد يوم، وتزداد الخطورة على أولئك الذين يحاولون عبور البحر المتوسط إلى أوروبا. على ضوء ما سبق، فنحن نعول كثيرا على دور فاعلي التنمية لمخاطبة التحديات التي تواجه السودان وشعبه، ونسمن كذلك مشاركة بنك التنمية الإسلامي وبنك التنمية الأفريقي والاتحاد الأوروبي وكافة المانحين ودول الجوار في هذا الحدث المهم. في الختام أرجو أن أجدد التأكيد على التزام حكومة السودان بتسهيل عمل المنظمات الإنسانية، ونحث في ذات الوقت المجتمع الدولي والمانحين للوفاء بتعهداتهم التي أعلنوا عنها منذ مايو الماضي دعما لخطة الاستجابة الإنسانية الخاصة بالسودان، وكذلك الخاصة بدول جواره والمجتمعات المضيفة، وذلك من خلال تقديم المزيد من الدعم الإنساني العاجل وكذلك الدعم التنموي متوسط وطويل المدى لتحسين البنية التحتية للمجتمعات المضيفة التي تعاني كما أسلفت من نقص حاد في كافة الاحتياجات والخدمات. وشكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And before giving the floor to a representative of the countries of asylum, my colleagues will show a short film.
After 8 months of fighting, lives have been devastated in Sudan, and over 6 million people find themselves displaced from their homes as they try to escape one of the fastest unfolding humanitarian crises in the world. Those who've made it to safety now shelter in parts of Sudan or have crossed the border into neighboring countries.
وجانا كل أتلا وأبوك من دربك أتلا وأنا كله بيقص دقاني مرة وايد أتلاني بدأت هنا مركني.
Beyond Sudan's borders, over 1.2 million people have sought refuge in neighboring countries that are already struggling to recover from the impact of previous conflicts. During a recent visit to Chad, UNHCR High Commissioner Filippo Grandi and the World Bank Managing Director for Operations, Ana Bierde, witnessed the dire humanitarian situation there and jointly recognized the need for more development investment alongside the delivery of humanitarian aid.
So you have an enormous mass of people coming across the border, and they carry literally with them humanitarian challenges. Hunger, wounded people, the risk of epidemics, all of this needs to be countered quickly by humanitarian action, which, by the way, is not sufficiently supported. They come into a very poor part of a country with few resources, where local communities already have challenges of their own. It is important from the very beginning of such a situation to invest, let's say, in the medium term, which means building schools that can be shared by local community and refugees, strengthening the health system, and I would say perhaps the most important, giving everybody economic opportunities.
Why is it important that the World Bank doesn't wait until the most conflict-affected phase is over? And I think it is because we care ultimately about poverty reduction. And if we don't act early, we're actually eroding development gains. We're eroding institutional capacity, which is already often weak, and we're putting people in more difficult circumstances, which makes it harder to lift them up later on.
Many times, refugees actually become part of the engine of development in a country where they have fled to.
Through this joint work, this partnership here with the World Bank and maybe other development institutions, if they follow your example, if through those partnerships we can be more assured that the medium term is taken care of, the education part, the livelihoods part, the health part, then we can concentrate on what we are better at.
أنا بشوف محل اليالي بقدر يقرأ فيه يا حاجة في راسي لأنه بقى ما عندنا شغل ما في زول قال عنده بيت تاني في الجنوب بيت انت ما عندي بيت ورا هناك بيتي خرب. انا داير مستقبل بتاع قرايه بتاع عيالي يا حاجه انا دايره.
Thank you very much. My first question will go to His Excellency Albino Akol Atak, Minister for Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management. Minister, South Sudan stands apart because in addition to an estimated 67,000 Sudanese refugees, you have received close to 362,000 South Sudanese returnees who have returned home in adverse circumstances, and many of them actually do not know South Sudan, having grown up in neighboring Sudan. If you look at the map, the return have been mapped across the country. Excellency, in your opinion, what can development actors do to support both the refugees and the returnees?
Thank you very much, moderator, for that question. And thank you to UNHCR for giving us this opportunity to participate in this very, very important side event. Excellencies, before I could answer this question, let me confirm some of the statements the moderator have just mentioned. It is true that since the eruption of this conflict in Sudan in April 2023, almost this figure has just moved to South Sudan. Closer to 450,000 people have moved to South Sudan. 83% of these people are South Sudanese citizens who have been living in Sudan, and they have been refugees there in Sudan. 15% of these are Sudanese, and of course, the government of South Sudan has just welcomed them with open arms, has opened its borders to receive everybody who is now fleeing the conflict. The government of South Sudan, with the partners, have done whatever they can, but the situation is still very dire. All the resources that government of South Sudan employed with its partners are overwhelmed with this movement of these people that have come from Sudan. And they are continuing to do this, but the situation is still dire. We are unable actually to give the basic service to these people that are coming. We are trying, but it is not sufficient. We are unable to treat even these simple illness that are coming with. We are unable to prevent the hunger that they are now facing. We are even unable to find them a settlement that deserves to be given to them. With all this, the government of South Sudan and its humanitarian partners are continuing and committing to do this. Despite this, the humanitarian funding is now cut. And of course, we are now expecting the next year that a lot of cut to continue to be there. So the situation will also continue to be worsening. In this situation, what is needed is that, and this to answer your question, the developmental actors are actually urged and need to move very fast for them to come in. While the humanitarian partners and the government of South Sudan are actually intervening to provide fast response to the situation, it is very important that development actors comes in so that we make a decent services to these people. And this is why we want to say that for them to come in, we need them to invest in self-reliance and livelihood activities, particularly agriculture, for these people that have come. This is very important. The second is that they also embark in employment schemes for the skilled refugees that are coming. And the government of South Sudan has already started by observing those skilled refugees, specifically the teachers and the doctors and the engineers that have come from Sudan. They are now working in government of South Sudan in all these aspects. So the developmental actors need to support in that area, and also to support the efforts of government of South Sudan to deliver basic services. They are also needed to also participate in trying to support infrastructure, specifically the roads infrastructure, because now the busiest entry point that people are using to come to South Sudan, which is ranked for those who knows South Sudan, for us to move refugees to the various refugees camps, it is very difficult because of roads. So this needed to be actually supported so that we go ahead. The other areas is local economies, because those areas that are bordering Sudan, they have been depending in their economic activities to Sudan. With this crisis in Sudan, that activities have now stopped, and they need to be supported in that area. We also urge the developmental actors to also to support in this area-based programming, to support the local government is very important. We also need people to work on social cohesion so that we prevent any conflict that arises when the refugees comes to join the local, communities. And then the most important thing is also the development actors. We need them also to help South Sudan in implementing the GRF pledges that South Sudan has just pledged in this. And the most important also issue is that we need also all of us to participate in bringing the everlasting peace in Sudan, because by doing so, we will be preventing all these issues. Finally, I want to thank those who have been now supporting what is happening in South Sudan, specifically the World Bank and European Union, for what they are now supporting our people in South Sudan. And last, I want to emphasize the points that we want to make the humanitarian and development and peace-building nexus a reality. As the government of South Sudan, we have started in this. By implementation of peace agreement, we have now stability. This is what is needed. And then also we want to prepare a ground for the dignified return to our people who have been sorting refugees in the neighboring countries. This, what the government of South Sudan is doing. What is now remaining is that the developmental actors also to join hands with the government of South Sudan to work in this area. So the ground is prepared for developmental actors to come and help the government of South Sudan, bringing everlasting solution to these displaced persons as a result of conflict in Sudan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. No, I think your points are very clear. This is an opportunity, to a certain extent unfortunate, because people, some of those who are coming back, and I'm now talking about the South Sudanese who are coming back, were not necessarily interested at this point of their life in coming back to South Sudan, but they are. And it's clear that it is an opportunity for South Sudan, as you said, to receive its nationals and ensure that they can rebuild their lives and integrate in the communities which they left such a long time ago. I'll now go to His Excellency Dr. Jean-Pierre Baptiste, Permanent Representative of Chad. Regional ramification of the Sudanese emergency run deep. Neighboring countries were already hosting a large number of displaced persons before the crisis, and sometimes struggling with severely underfunded humanitarian programs. Nevertheless, these countries, Chad in particular, have opened their borders to those seeking safety. To put this generosity in perspective, it's important to note that Chad has received more refugees in these last 6 months than it has in the last 20 years. Over 450 Sudanese refugees and asylum seekers have arrived in the country since mid-April. Ambassador, can you please tell us the ways in which you think development actors can support these provinces where refugees have arrived, to address the needs of host communities and refugees themselves? You have the floor.
Je m'excuse, je vais m'adresser en français, c'est mieux. Non, avant de répondre à votre question, il faut se dire que le Tchad est un pays d'Afrique centrale, dans le Sahel, entouré à droite par le Soudan, au nord par la Libye, de l'autre côté le Niger et le Nigeria, et au sud par la République centrafricaine. Donc, ça vous donne une idée des problèmes qu'a le Tchad actuellement dans sa situation. Et en plus, nous sommes dans une période de transition. Nous avons des élections pour l'adoption de la Constitution qui va se dérouler le 17 décembre. Nous avons les présidentielles et les législatives qui sont prévues en 2024. Donc, ça vous donne une idée des problèmes que nous avons, pas par rapport aux réfugiés. Je vous donnerai juste une petite anecdote. Quand il y a eu le démarrage de la guerre au Soudan, le président a signé 2 lois. Donc, je l'ai rencontré, je lui ai dit, écoute, portant protection des réfugiés, définition des réfugiés, portant protection et soutien aux personnes déplacées. Je lui ai dit, écoute, Monsieur le Président, nous avons eu un dialogue national qui a fixé les priorités pour notre pays, c'est-à-dire le retour à l'ordre constitutionnel, le développement, certains projets. Et là, vous signez une loi qui permet aux réfugiés pratiquement d'avoir le même statut. Est-ce que ce n'est pas contraire au résultat du dialogue? Il m'a répondu par une phrase. Il m'a dit, tu sais, monsieur l'ambassadeur, vous savez, aujourd'hui, ce sont eux les réfugiés. Demain, nous-mêmes, on peut se retrouver dans cette même situation comme on l'a connu en 1979, où la majeure partie des Tchadiens étaient réfugiés au Cameroun à cause de la guerre civile. Donc, et je peux vous assurer que les maigres ressources qu'il y avait à l'époque, avec l'arrivée des réfugiés soudanais, on les a mis dans les réfugiés soudanais. Ce n'est pas suffisant, certes. Nous manquons d'infrastructures écolières, nous manquons d'infrastructures hospitalières, nous manquons pratiquement de tout. Mais vous savez, le Tchad et le Soudan, c'est comme le Tchad et la Centrafrique au sud du pays. Ce sont les mêmes peuples. Et je vous prends juste un exemple. J'ai eu l'opportunité de visiter les camps de réfugiés à la frontière soudanaise. C'était en septembre de cette année, il y a 2 mois. Je peux vous assurer que quand vous êtes là, à la frontière, vous voyez les réfugiés soudanais traverser la frontière. Il y a l'histoire d'une femme qui m'a donné des cauchemars pendant des mois et des mois. Une femme soudanaise dont le mari a été tué au Soudan, qui rentrait calmement avec ses 2 filles, elle attrapait par la main. Elle avait ses 2 garçons, un devant et l'autre derrière. C'est en traversant la frontière que quelqu'un lui a dit, il y a du sang qui coule. Le petit qui avait 3 mois avait reçu une balle dans la tête. Celle qui était derrière avait reçu une balle dans la nuque. Les 2 enfants étaient morts, mais tellement qu'il y avait ce stress. Et quand vous voyez à l'arrivée le visage de ces gens-là, la détresse qu'ils avaient, vous ne pouvez pas rester insensible. On est en train de faire beaucoup d'efforts par rapport à ça, avec l'adoption de la loi, la promulgation, et c'est prévu aussi dans nos engagements par rapport au Forum des réfugiés, la donation de près de 300 000 hectares pour développer, pour que ces réfugiés puissent se nourrir en cultivant, ou bien le développement pastoral aussi. Donc tout ça pour vous dire que la situation de notre pays, malgré cela, le chef de l'État nous a dit, écoutez, quel que soit Alpha, nos frontières resteront ouvertes à nos frères soudanais, à nos frères centrafricains. Nous avons des réfugiés qui sont là au Tchad depuis plus de 15 ans. J'ai visité personnellement le camp des réfugiés centrafricains. Ils sont là depuis plus de 15 ans. Mais les bailleurs se sont fatigués. Vous connaissez comment ça se passe. Donc, les financements se sont stoppés et les gens ont trouvé une manière. Donc, maintenant, pour aider à cela, le Tchad, qu'est-ce qu'il a fait? Il a dit, à partir de maintenant, vous avez les mêmes droits que les Tchadiens. Il faut trouver des financements pour qu'ils puissent trouver du travail, pour qu'ils soient insérés dans la société, etc., etc. Tout ça pour dire que les solutions, on peut faire appel aux donateurs, on peut faire appel à la communauté internationale pour financer certains projets. Mais de mon point de vue à moi, je pense que ce n'est pas suffisant. Il faut qu'il y ait une chose primordiale, essayer de ramener la paix au Soudan. Tant qu'il n'y aura pas la paix au Soudan, les réfugiés vont continuer à venir, les populations hautes vont continuer à souffrir parce que c'est eux qui reçoivent les réfugiés. On ne s'en rend pas compte. J'ai été à Adré, une population de 100 000 habitants. Il y avait 200 000 réfugiés, le double de la population locale. Qu'est-ce qui va se passer à la longue? Les conflits communautaires, et on a installé les réfugiés dans les endroits où les gens cultivaient. Ça veut dire qu'ils ne peuvent plus cultiver vu qu'il y a des gens qui habitent dans cette zone. Et les maigres cultures qu'ils faisaient dans les petites zones, ils étaient partagés avec... Vous connaissez comment ça se passe quand vous recevez quelqu'un, cette personne est prioritaire. Et j'ai encore un autre élément qui m'est resté dans la tête. La Banque mondiale avait financé une école pour les réfugiés. Donc, le chef de village, il me dit, mais ça, c'est pour les réfugiés et pour nous, c'est où? Ah, c'est ça la réalité. Vous n'avez pas d'école dans ces endroits-là, c'est à la frontière. Donc, maintenant, comment trouver le juste milieu pour ne pas créer des conflits communautaires, pour ne pas créer la famine? C'est tout un processus qui doit, et pour aider au développement de ce pays. Donc, maintenant, en termes de travail, si vous parlez de travail pour les jeunes, pourquoi les jeunes sont désœuvrés? Parce que certains ont étudié, ils ont leur diplôme et ils ne sont pas arrimés à la fonction publique et le secteur privé est très peu développé. Maintenant, peut-être trouver un autre système pour, je ne dis pas pour ne pas recevoir pour que ce nombre, cette masse de réfugiés puisse diminuer, il faut qu'il y ait la paix. Et je l'ai dit à diverses reprises quand je parle de la paix. C'est pas un mot vain, c'est un mot qui nous permettra à nous, pour le Tchad, de ramener la paix au Soudan. C'est vrai, mais c'est seulement, ça diminuera le nombre de réfugiés, ça permettra le retour de ces réfugiés chez eux dans une situation tranquille, parce que la situation, honnêtement parlant, quand vous discutez avec les réfugiés qui arrivent, vous avez mal au cœur, je vous assure. Donc, tout ça pour dire que sans la paix, on ne résoudra ni le problème du Soudan, ni le problème de la Centrafrique. On va pouvoir mobiliser chez l'Union européenne, chez la Banque mondiale et tout ce qui s'ensuit, et chez tous les partenaires des fonds, mais ces fonds seront limités pendant un laps de temps, tandis que le problème va persister. Donc, c'est pour ça que j'insiste beaucoup, et je pense que les Nations unies, étant un ancien des Nations unies, je vous connais trop bien, donc les Nations unies, à travers vous, à travers l'OIM, à travers les agences qui travaillent sur le terrain, moi, je ne sais pas, je ne suis plus des Nations Unies, je ne peux pas le faire, mais écrivez au secrétaire général des Nations Unies. Vous avez des pays comme la Suisse qui n'ont jamais été impliqués dans ces conflits. Que la Suisse, les Nations Unies prennent le lead, organiser des conférences fortes, ce qu'il faut faire pour que, enfin, les Soudanais, les femmes soudanaises, les enfants soudanais, le nombre de morts qu'il y a journalièrement au Soudan, je vous assure que ce n'est pas quelque chose que vous méritez de savoir ou vous vouliez connaître. C'est une situation catastrophique, c'est ça le mot. Et seule la paix, de mon point de vue, peut résoudre le problème. On peut amener tous les bailleurs du fonds, même Bill Gates, si on l'amène, il met ses milliards, il va se fatiguer au bout d'un mois. Donc, tout ce que je veux dire par là, c'est que même si, avec l'UNHCR, on s'occupe bien des réfugiés, on les loge, vous aurez d'un côté les populations hautes qui n'auront pas cet avantage-là. Quand vous voyez les camps, c'est une étendue de tentes, mais vraiment, à l'horizon, vous n'avez que ça. Mais jusqu'à quand on va continuer comme ça? Je pense qu'il faut taper sur la table et que ce soit vous au niveau du HCR, que ce soit au niveau de l'OIM, que ce soit au niveau des agences des Nations Unies. Moi, ce que je vous propose en tant qu'ambassadeur et en tant qu'ancien des Nations Unies, écrivez au secrétaire général et demandez-lui et contactez les autorités suisses. C'est un pays neutre qui n'intervient pas dans le conflit. Ils peuvent organiser quelque chose de grâce pour ramener la paix, pour que ces enfants-là puissent vivre normalement, puissent vivre leur vie, puissent aller à l'école, puissent se soigner. Sinon, on va continuer dans le même système, demander de l'aide par-ci, demander de l'aide par-là. Il faut résoudre le problème à la source. Et la source, c'est la paix au Soudan. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Non, merci beaucoup, Excellence, et vous avez raison. Vous avez raison, ce sont ce que nous essayons de faire en tant qu'acteurs humanitaires ou acteurs de développement, c'est d'essayer de penser les blessures, mais pas de résoudre les problèmes. Et c'est clair que il faut qu'on puisse faire en sorte que la paix revienne au Soudan et dans la région de manière générale. Merci pour ça. Merci pour le rôle que le Tchad joue. Et vous l'avez dit vous-même, la région dans laquelle les réfugiés arrivent est une région qui est pauvre, mais les gens sont généreux et continuent de fournir l'assistance nécessaire. Et vous avez raison de dire que quand on fournit l'assistance, il ne faut pas oublier les populations locales. Merci infiniment. I'll now go to His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Gamal Eldin, Permanent Representative of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Egypt has welcomed an estimated 380,000 Sudanese refugees and asylum seekers since the onset of this crisis. Most have gone to urban areas such as Cairo, Alexandria. The response has been focused on facilitating their access to basic services through their inclusion in the national system, such as health and education. Ambassador, can you tell us how you think development actors can support this inclusion agenda? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. At the outset, I would like to thank the UNHCR for organizing this very important high-level event, and I'm quite honored to be among such distinguished panelists. His Excellency Minister Akol Atak, Minister of Humanitarian Affairs of South Sudan, and my dear brother Ambassador Hassan and Ambassador Jean-Pierre today here. I would like to reiterate Egypt's full solidarity and support to the people of Sudan and its unwavering efforts to put an end to the ongoing hostilities, including through the implementation of the action plan for ending the crisis in Sudan, endorsed by the foreign ministers of the Sudan's neighboring states mechanism, which aims to achieve a permanent ceasefire with a view to creating an inclusive and comprehensive inter-Sudanese dialogue to reach a peaceful settlement to the current crisis and facilitating humanitarian assistance to the people and communities most in need. As you rightly mentioned, since the outbreak of the ongoing crisis in Sudan, Egypt has facilitated the crossing of an estimated number of 380,000 Sudanese nationals seeking shelter in Egypt. This comes on top of what IOM has estimated to be 9 million foreigners who are in refugee or migrant situations in Egypt, of which there are 5 million Sudanese guests. The Egyptian authorities have adopted a set of measures that were implemented in collaboration with UN agencies, local NGOs, and grassroots organizations to respond to the escalating emergency. This included providing a wide range of emergency and relief services to people arriving at the border and in the neighboring governorates, with a particular attention to women and children, especially in the areas of health and education, as well as the areas of reproductive health and support for potential victims of violence in the case of women. A large number of Sudanese nationals who have fled the ongoing hostilities are currently residing in different areas in Egypt, particularly Cairo and Alexandria, as you have mentioned. They received the same treatment accorded to migrants and refugees living in Egypt under its one refugee approach, which include ensuring their freedom of movement, respecting their human rights and dignity on the basis of non-discrimination, as well as providing them with basic services, particularly health and education sectors, on an equal footing with Egyptian citizens. However, the current crisis in Sudan has highlighted a number of shortcomings in the international response to similar crises and the need for a more proactive role by the development sector. First, the crisis in Sudan is a regional crisis, and it needs to be addressed in a manner that not only focuses on the ongoing hostilities and escalating humanitarian crisis inside of Sudan, but also on the repercussions it has on the neighboring countries and the hosting communities who are bearing the brunt of this crisis with little or no support. Second, there is a pressing need to step up the global humanitarian response to forced displacement crises and to ensure that funding commitments are fulfilled, with a view to enhancing the assistance provided to forcibly displaced persons in parallel to their hosting communities. Despite the efforts of neighboring countries and the awareness of the international community of the gravity of the situation, the pledges made at the high-level pledging event to support the humanitarian response in Sudan and the region currently stand at a low of 35%. Third, there is a critical need to operationalize the humanitarian development peace nexus with the aim of addressing the underlying root causes of the current conflict while responding to the emergency needs of civilians and investing in the longer-term development of local communities to enhance their resilience and decrease their fragility to potential crises. In this context, there is a significant role that the development actors need to play, not only to support the ongoing UN efforts as well as regional efforts to respond to the escalating humanitarian crisis in Sudan, but also to address the root of such crises by strengthening and enhancing the ability of the Sudanese authorities and its neighboring countries to respond to any potential crises in a way that would prevent its escalation or its re-eruption in the future. Our vision needs to be more long-term, with more emphasis on peace-building efforts in local communities that go in line with their context-specific needs and in a manner that enhances and serves long-term development priorities and objectives. Without such a long-term comprehensive view, we will be trapped in these vicious, endless cycles of conflict, fragility, and forced displacement. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Excellency. The points that you made and the specific reference to the fact that we already know that for next year, we will not have enough humanitarian resources to respond to the crisis that already exists, and the need, as you said, to make sure that we have development actors playing a greater role also to prevent situations of forced displacement. I will now go to Mr. Yero Balde, Director of Transition State Coordination Office at the African Development Bank. Yero, the African Development Bank has committed to scaling up its engagement to tackle fragility and build resilience on the continent. The Sudan crisis has all the ingredients to drive fragility, secondary displacement, and further conflict. What can the African Development Bank do to stabilize local economies which have experienced massive demographic and economic shocks due to the conflict? Yero, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank UNHCR for organizing this important session and giving us an opportunity to share our perspective. The Sudan conflict has become the world's fastest growing displacement crisis and now has the largest number of internally displaced people globally, more than 5 million people. This is indeed more than the entire population of Liberia. The social and economic consequences of the conflict are catastrophic. 80% of health facilities are destroyed, and about 24 million people, which means about half of the population, have become food insecure. The IMF projects a decrease in economic output of 18% for 2023, and the spillovers of the conflict are putting further strain on Sudan's neighbors. Chad, already among the top largest of refugee-receiving countries globally, has received more refugees in the last 6 months than it has in the past 20 years. This conflict is indeed a threat for the region if a solution is not found swiftly. The African Development Bank is committed to advancing African solutions for African problems in coordination with the African Union, regional economic communities such as IGAD, and international partners. It is in this context that the bank is supporting the peace-building and stabilization mechanisms of the African Union in the Horn of Africa. As Africa's premier development finance institution, we use our resources and expertise to support our member countries, build resilience, and chart a way out of fragility. 2 years ago, we supported Sudan jointly with the IMF, World Bank, and bilateral partners to clear its areas and set their path to the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. Since then, we have invested heavily in the agricultural sector, both through the public and the private sector, to support the country grow more of its own wheat and its high reliance on imports, and had made it vulnerable to external shocks. Thanks to our partnership with the World Food Programme, we can continue to support wheat production as we speak, targeting the safer regions of the country. This is an example of how a longer-term development intervention can meet both short-term humanitarian needs and be forward-looking to build resilience, as it invests in youth and women and provides them with hope for a brighter future. As much as the security situation allows, we will leverage our humanitarian and peace-building partners and continue to invest in the source of resilience, notably for youth, women, and communities in rural areas. Our experience shows that we can continue to stay engaged when we join forces across humanitarian, development, and peace-building partners, in line with our commitment to the triple next approach. This is manifested by our joint crisis response project with UNDP, approved by our board of directors last week, to support Sudanese refugees and host communities in Eastern Chad and Central African Republic. It is also in the same vein that we are discussing with UNHCR to jointly support the spillover effects in other neighboring countries. Furthermore, only yesterday, the bank signed an MOU with the International Committee of the Red Cross, which will further enhance our capacity to work in insecure environments. In closing, I would like to reiterate the importance of today's discussion and our willingness to work with all of you in supporting national and regional solutions for the crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yero. I think the key word from your intervention is to remain engaged, and for development actors to remain engaged, working closely with us humanitarian actors, regardless of what the circumstances could be. I'll now go to Erika Gerritsen from EU INTPA. EU INTPA recently announced its decision to allocate 7 million euro to UNHCR and IOM for a regional program to support Chad, Ethiopia, and South Sudan to support refugees and host communities alike. This investment sends a strong signal of support for community-centered interventions, which is critical as the communities are on the front lines of the response to the Sudan crisis. Can you tell us more about EU's role in supporting humanitarian and development responses to the Sudan crisis, both in Sudan and in the neighboring countries? Over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Chair. Thanks a lot for inviting the EU in attending this indeed very important event as we are moving towards the end of this GRF. The EU is strongly aware of the human catastrophe that is unfolding in Sudan and in the neighboring countries, and wish to hereby express our strong concern as well as solidarity in view of this situation. We are strongly committed to supporting the populations which are suffering from the war in Sudan and the displaced people in particular. It is important to bear in mind that even if some sort of resolution of the conflict will be found, the effects which it has already had on displacement across the region will be felt for years. So we are here for a long crisis. At the same time, indeed, as has already been said, no development will happen without peace. And the EU is strongly committed to supporting the peace process and peace initiatives, in particular, working with civil society organizations and the African Union. In this context, and as the EU is hosting and having talks, including with civil society organizations, I would like to point, being the only woman on this panel, the important role that women have to play in building long-lasting peace. So please, a call to engage with women and to engage with women organizations when working in finding a peaceful resolution of the current situation. Third, the EU will continue to press for accountability Through the EU's new framework for autonomous restrictive measures and other means, the EU provides leverage for stopping the war, assuring humanitarian access, protecting the political process, and tackling human rights abuses. Now, in this context, what is the EU providing financially? Indeed, the EU is bringing together the means that we have from the humanitarian and from our development tools to respond and to bring support to this current situation. Emphasizing the holistic approach of the EU has recently pledged at the pledging conference on the 19th of June for 190 million euros, 60 million humanitarian and 130 development cooperation financing to benefit the refugees, the IDPs, and the host communities alike. This response integrates immediate assistance in conflict zone with mid to long-term resilience efforts in stable areas, emphasizing the nexus approach, humanitarian, development, and peace, and prioritizing social cohesion and alleviate tensions among communities. Chair, you were mentioning a specific support of 7 million to the UNHCR, which will also be complemented with further support to NGOs, which will be coming from the EU flexible mechanism on migration, and through which indeed we will support the forced displaced from Sudan to Chad, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. And the EU is also reinforcing its support to Egypt, recognizing the strong efforts that Egypt is making in hosting refugees. But as this situation indeed will continue unfolding, we will continue providing support, and further announcements are to be expected next year as discussions are going on to develop and formulate new projects and supports. But all this is taking place in the context of strong challenges for us as development community and as humanitarian actors. Since the October 21 military coup, the EU's development cooperation has faced these challenges. However, we have ensured swift reorientation of the funds to ensure continued support to the Sudanese people and vulnerable refugees in livelihoods, health, education, food security, and human rights. And despite that less than half of the country affected by the conflict, security uncertainties require donor flexibility, with refugees shifting to eastern, northern, and southern states where the EU project persists and where we will continue providing support. Access for implementing partners remains difficult, despite our efforts to prioritize food security, primary health care to supply essential basic services, and bureaucratic procedures of the de facto authorities that slow down timely assistance in hard-to-reach areas. Some countries in the region have raised concern that the Sudan conflict could destabilize indeed the Horn of Africa and the Sahel regions in a more longer-term way. And regionalization of the conflict would likely cause one of the most severe humanitarian and security crises in the region ever. Therefore, as the EU High Representative Borrell has stated in April, the EU reaffirms its steadfast support and solidarity with the people of Sudan, especially women and youth, who led a peaceful revolution 3 years ago. Their aspirations and requests for a better future will not be forgotten. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gerritsen. And I mean, your point, and it's an important one to underline, the fact that even if the conflict was to end tomorrow, the consequence of the effects of the conflict will last for a long period of time. And we have to have that in mind as we implement our activities and program. And also you made reference to accountability, which is an important point, and access, because as we are meeting today, many of our colleagues working in Sudan in particular have difficulties accessing some of the affected populations. Last but not least, Islamic Development Bank, Mr. Abdi Abdullahi, your manager, Resilience and Fragility Division of the Islamic Development Bank. Areas affected by conflict and fragility should not be left behind. Yet forced displacement brought about by the Sudan crisis presents a very real and major development challenge on the African continent. African economic development will be set back by the conflict in Sudan and its regional implications unless action is taken from the very onset by development partners. In your assessment, how can the Islamic Development Bank support efforts to enhance access to services in areas impacted by the displacement and large-scale return? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to participate in this important session addressing to find solution to one of the global humanitarian challenges. On behalf of the Islamic Development Bank President, who could not attend due to prior commitments, I extend my sincere thanks to UNHCR. Before going to the subject of our meeting today, it's imperative that we deplore in the strongest possible terms the horrific events unfolding in Gaza, Palestine. The relentless violence and loss of innocent lives and widespread suffering are condemnable and unacceptable. It's crucial for the international community to unite to put an end to this unacceptable inhuman aggression. Ladies and gentlemen, addressing the challenge of conflict and displacement in Sudan is crucial for the African continent's development, given the significant number of refugees and internally displaced persons. The Islamic Development Bank has actively supported Sudanese socio-economic development with a total net of approval of around 1.65 billion spanning infrastructure, education, agriculture, trade, and private sector. Aligned with our strategy on poverty and resilience, the Islamic Development Bank will continue supporting the Sudanese population affected by the conflict by providing access to essential services. For instance, we have recently partnered with International Committee of Red Cross to deliver urgent and emergency response focuses, basic, social, and wash services in mostly affected area in Sudan. Our first fragility and resilience policy tackles the displacement root causes, bridging the gap between humanitarian and development efforts to support refugees and hosting communities. That's why the Islamic Development Bank, through its Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development, also partnered with UNHCR to launch Global Islamic Fund for Refugees. It aims to mobilize around 500 million to support refugees and hosting communities, including Sudan, through development interventions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, overall, the bank is actively advancing its commitment to uplift refugees and hosting communities in member countries through targeted socio-economic development initiatives, including education, skills development, entrepreneurship development, livelihood development. The skills training and education program is key initiative approved by the bank last year, focusing on 15 member countries, including Sudan, hosting over 1 million refugees and IDPs, internally displaced persons, with a total approval of over 100 million fund. The program aims to benefit 500,000 individuals and emphasizing skills enhancement and education. The bank also supports young refugees through higher education and through its scholarship program. The initiative reflects the bank's strategic commitment to comprehensively address displacement challenges and invest in the long-term resilience and prosperity of affected communities, symbolizing vision of enduring positive change. Our commitment goes beyond financial support to create lasting hope for young refugees and hosting communities. Through investment in various sectors, we provide tangible tools for self-sufficiency, fostering optimism that transcends immediate challenges, empowering the young refugees who are the architects of tomorrow, ignites a beacon of hope for future generations. In reaffirming our commitment, the Islamic Development Bank will continue to collaborate and closely work with development partners and UN agencies, fostering the humanitarian development peace nexus for Sudan, sustainable peace and development. Together, we forge a path toward brighter and more hopeful tomorrow for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Abdullahi. Thanks a lot for the focus that the Islamic Development Bank is now placing on forced displacement and refugee situations around the world. And in particular, as you referred yourself, the Global Islamic Fund for refugees. So we now have about 25 minutes, and we have 12 intervention speakers from the floor. So it's, make the math, it's about 2 minutes per person. So please stick to that so that we will remain on time. We'll start with His Excellency Saïd Hassan, ministre de l'Intérieur de Djibouti. Vous avez la parole.
Merci, monsieur l'assistant du haut commissaire en charge des opérations dans les Nations Unies pour le réfugié. Mesdames et messieurs les ministres présents ici, mesdames et messieurs les ambassadeurs, mesdames et messieurs les partenaires, Djibouti déplore la situation humanitaire et sécuritaire au Soudan, pays frère qui est déchiré par un conflit fratricide ayant entraîné un lourd bilan humain, des déplacements massifs des populations et la destruction des infrastructures socio-économiques. Face à cette crise au Soudan, mon pays a toujours œuvré pour le retour de la paix et de la stabilité et de l'unité nationale, impératif essentiel pour éviter l'effondrement total du Soudan qui risquerait d'engendrer une instabilité régionale. Djibouti réitère son attachement à l'initiation rapide d'un cessez-le-feu préalable indispensable à l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire et le retour d'un Soudan en paix et stable. C'est en ce sens que Djibouti, en sa qualité de président en exercice de l'IGAD, a, en plus de ses nombreuses actions diplomatiques de médiation, tenu le 9 décembre 2023 le 41e sommet extraordinaire de l'IGAD afin de trouver des solutions politiques à la crise au Soudan. En effet, Djibouti estime que seule une solution politique négociée pourra permettre au Soudan de sortir de la crise actuelle et nous réitérons notre détermination à travailler avec l'ensemble des pays et organisateurs agissant dans ce sens. C'est pourquoi nous continuerons à appuyer les initiatives de paix régionales IGAD, continentale, Union africaine et multilatérales telles que la plateforme de Jeddah, co-organisée par le Royaume d'Arabie saoudite et les États-Unis avec le soutien de l'IGAD. Enfin, nous appelons tous les partenaires techniques et financiers à appuyer nos efforts de médiation pour un retour à la paix au Soudan, ainsi qu'à continuer de soutenir le Soudan, non seulement dans la fourniture de la réponse humanitaire, mais également à poursuivre leur coopération en matière de développement. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Merci beaucoup, Excellence. Je donne la parole à son Excellence l'ambassadeur Tsehab Kebebu Dakar, Permanent Representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Assistant High Commissioner Rauf Mazu. Excellencies, thank you for your briefings. Ethiopia remains deeply concerned over the deteriorating security and humanitarian conditions in Sudan. The geographic scope of the conflict and the number of actors is increasing, and we believe there is no military solution to the conflict in the Sudan. Ending the conflict in the Sudan through long-term ceasefire or cessation of hostilities is the only viable way forward. We are highly encouraged by the promising outcome of the 41st Extraordinary IGAD Assembly of Heads of State and Government held last week. The resolve of the Sudanese parties to have a one-to-one meeting with the facilitation of IGAD is a promising gesture. Ethiopia will continue to work with the parties under the auspices of IGAD for the peaceful resolution of the conflict. Mr. Moderator, the worsening humanitarian situation in Sudan is worrisome. As stated by the High Commissioner, 7 million people have been forcibly displaced inside Sudan and across to neighboring countries. Ethiopia has received about 100,000 displaced people by the conflict in Sudan, and our borders remain open. We believe our response must begin with profound sense of empathy, acknowledging the individual stories and hardships that propel these families across borders in search of safety. Those who flee their homes are hosted by communities located in areas with already limited access to infrastructure and basic social services. In our response to the new arrivals, we are faced with substantial budgetary shortfall for expanding WASH services. Strengthening health services is imperative, especially in light of recent cholera outbreaks. However, the widening financing gap remains a huge challenge to our response. We believe that the people of Sudan and neighboring host countries deserve enhanced international support. As we conclude the World Refugee Forum 2023, may our shared empathy translate into tangible actions, serving as a beacon of hope for those who seek assistance. Finally, while commending the generous support provided by SOFA, we'd like to call upon partners to continue their support to address immediate needs of those displaced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I now give the floor to Mr. Xavier de Victor, Advisor, Fragility, Conflict and Violence, World Bank Group.
Thank you so much, Raouf. We continue to monitor the difficult situation inside Sudan with deep concerns for the humanitarian and development toll that the conflict is inflicting on the country and on the millions of people who remain in the country, including those who have been internally displaced. We are working with our partners and stakeholders to explore potential avenues to support conflict-affected communities. But large numbers of people have newly become refugees. And in spite of the dire development challenges they are facing themselves, host countries are implementing a range of generous inclusion policies that are commendable or are rapidly moving in this direction. We believe this is important because refugee situations tend to last, and it is therefore prudent to develop responses that can be sustained over time if needed, both financially and socially, as the ambassador of Chad highlighted earlier in his intervention. We applaud the efforts to take a medium-term perspective from the start, or quoting the High Commissioner in the video, the education part, the jobs part, the health part. But this has a cost, hence the importance of responsibility sharing. This is why we are scaling up our programs aimed at supporting refugees, returnees, and host communities in neighboring countries, including in Chad, where we are designing project or scaling up project in refugee hosting areas, in Ethiopia, where we are more than doubling our engagement in support of refugees and host communities, or in South Sudan, where we're working on education, health, social protection. Let me close by thanking UNHCR for our partnership. We saw it in action at the highest level in the video, but we also see it on the ground every day. This is about action, unity, and impact. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Xavier. I'll give the floor now to Her Excellency Daike Potzel, Director General for Crisis Prevention, Stabilization, Peace Building and Humanitarian Assistance of the German Federal Foreign Office.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, at today's event, we have heard many gruesome details about the terrible situation in Sudan and the hardship refugees and host communities face in the neighboring countries. And my message, therefore, is this crisis and the people suffering from this crisis are not forgotten. Germany works closely with all humanitarian partners to protect IDPs in Sudan. But we also strongly support neighboring countries such as Chad, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt. And I would like to commend the hospitality of host communities that share everything with new arrivals. Many do so in already dire situations. Germany is providing more than 200 million euros in humanitarian assistance alone to Sudan and the region until 2024. More than 2/3 of these funds are allocated to support refugees and host communities in neighboring countries. And Germany spends another 302 million on development aid for resilience building in the region. Germany is not only one of the largest donors to the CERF and a strong supporter of the Sudan Humanitarian Fund, but has also substantially supported the essential work of humanitarian organizations, including UNHCR. We also work with NGOs, such as, for instance, the Welthungerhilfe, where we support a project that increases resilience of refugees and host communities through a nexus approach in North Darfur and the east of Sudan. People in Sudan desperately need help, but in order to reach those in need, we urgently need access. At the same time, we need to address the root causes, as was said, and I just want to echo, the people of Sudan need peace now. And to ensure a lasting solution, we feel that Sudan needs a political process with civilian actors at the core to pave way for a civilian government and ending of the conflict. Meanwhile, it's paramount to ensure compliance with IHL and the protection of civilian and humanitarian workers. And with this in mind, I strongly condemn the recent attack on humanitarian convoys in Sudan. Our thoughts are with the family and with the families and friends of the victims. This tragedy serves as an important reminder of the danger that humanitarian workers face in many operations. We are sincerely thankful for their commitment and dedication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Podsel. I'll give the floor now to Ambassador Andersen, Permanent Representative of Norway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, ambassadors, colleagues, friends. I think in the interest of time, I'll go directly to the core question, as so adequately pointed out by Chad and just now reiterated by my German colleague. We need peace in Sudan. The main driver of humanitarian needs is the ongoing conflict, which is fought seemingly with so little regard for civilian lives and IHL. It remains the main driver of humanitarian needs, and it needs to stop. While we wait for cessation of hostilities, I think I would like to second the point that was made very aptly in the video by UNHCR and the World Bank, that we need to connect what we do in terms of humanitarian assistance, that we have stepped up, by the way, and our long-term development. It is difficult in this state of affairs to do long-term development, but we need to continue to do that, also in order to maintain a vision of a future, of a day after, of a future for the people of Sudan with the tangible peace dividend to be had. So we need to get that coherence right. We're trying to do that in our own efforts, and we're advocating for the UN to do the same. The only positive bright spot today has been the many accounts of this enormous solidarity shown by the neighboring states. So I commend all those opening their borders, Chad, South Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia, and others we have heard just now. We are also trying to help these neighboring states. One of the things that we do with FAO is seed distribution in Sudan, in Senai, Gadarif, and the White Nile regions to have a viable agricultural activity there. And in Uganda, we work with WFP and UNHCR to help refugees grow their own food. Again, an attempt to ease the burden on host countries. But to end where I started, I think we need to break the cycle of violence in Sudan that has been plaguing this country for so long. And with that, also the cycle of impunity that was rightly pointed out by the EU. I think that is the main point I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'll give the floor now to Mr. Freddy Carver, head of the Regional Durable Solutions Secretariat, REDES.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this really important meeting. I run a team working on behalf of 14 NGOs in the Horn of Africa focused on the promotion of durable solutions. And I know that our members are really concerned to ensure that the profile of this situation, as has been said today, is raised. I want to focus on this question of resources that has been raised, I think, repeatedly over the course of this afternoon, and rightly. And I think clearly resources are critical. And we need to find a way to do two things at once. On the one hand, we need to ensure that we are trying to meet the huge protection needs that we can't wish away in Sudan and across the region. But we also need to think about the longer term, and I strongly endorse that message. But I want to focus just briefly on the how. And I think there are a number of elements we need to think about in terms of how we're working at the moment to do this properly and to do this effectively. And we need to change, I think, a lot about the way we work. We need to change the way we identify needs. I want to pick up on the comments by the colleague from Chad who talked about focusing on people's humanity, understanding the capacities that they have, the resources that they have available to them, the ways that we can support them, that will help them steer away from protracted displacement. And we also need to recognize the trauma that in many cases is going to be the most significant obstacle to solutions for those people. We need to change the way we target. We need to move away from identifying people based on their status, based on their movements. We need area-based approaches. We need comprehensive approaches that bring different actors together and recognize the needs of refugees and hosts together. We need to change who we partner with. The biggest untapped resource in these environments is the local capacities. We know they're the first responders. We know that these are the people who are bearing the greatest burden. We need to find ways to support them and build on the work they're already doing in the work that we do. And finally, we need to change the way we coordinate. And I think this is where the humanitarian and development nexus becomes extremely challenging, but we need to find a balance between coherent work, coherent frameworks that allow for joint action, but also a high level of decentralization that allows for context-based approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Carvers. I'll give the floor now to Mr. Frederick Soda, Director of Operation and Emergencies at the IOM.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I want to join the distinguished panelists in drawing your attention to the pivotal role that transition and development actors play in the early recovery in Sudan and in the neighboring countries, as well as the role of the Sudanese diaspora. Millions of those displaced are in towns and rural areas that often lack the essential infrastructure and services necessary to meet their basic needs. The expertise and resources of transition and development actors is needed for stabilization and livelihood interventions. These are also needed in the displaced communities that are hosting them. These processes need to be inclusive, as has already been mentioned by one of the panelists. Involvement of the Sudanese diaspora with its wealth of expertise, deep knowledge of the local context, and commitment to their communities can also play a critical role in responding to the needs of those affected by the crisis. And IOM is working on mobilizing and leveraging these capacities for the transitional recovery. In neighboring countries, the opportunities for transition and development actors are equally significant. Refugees, migrant returnees, and host communities are in desperate need of more lasting housing solutions, livelihood support, and essential services, critical to reduce the social tension in those communities. Transition and development actors have a crucial role where humanitarian funding is stretched. Their resources and expertise can maximize the impact of humanitarian interventions and thus contribute to the well-being and prospects of the millions affected by the war. IOM reaffirms its commitment to the people of Sudan and to working in partnerships with all stakeholders for Sudan and for the region for a peaceful future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soda. I'll give the floor to Catherine Osborne, Policy Advisor, Forced Displacement Solutions, Crisis Bureau at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP.
So
Excellencies and all partners, I think first and foremost, we as UNDP want to reiterate the call that has come from others that the war in Sudan must stop, as the suffering of the people is simply unbearable. UNDP is concerned that Sudan's more than 3 million IDPs remain invisible. UNDP in Sudan supports displacement affected communities in all regions that are accessible through 7 regional offices and our base in Port Sudan. We are investing at the local level to mitigate the complete institutional collapse and be able to preserve systems that are necessary to maintain service delivery, and that obviously will be instrumental for recovery. In neighboring countries, we are leveraging our footprint and our development expertise by enhancing local absorption capacity and service delivery on arrival, including in Chad. We are fostering social cohesion and accountability between governments and communities impacted by displacement. We are providing technical support to authorities on incorporating refugees and IDPs into their local and national development plans. And finally, we are very focused on generating dignified livelihoods for vulnerable hosts and other groups. UNDP advocates that governments in the region must have access to predictable and adequate financing to allow them to address forced displacement. Development interventions must start from the outset of the crisis so that policies, institutions, and societies can sustain solutions in the long term. Finally, we commend UNHCR's coordination of the Sudan Regional Refugee Response Plan, but call for an approach that advances resilience-based development, learning from the great partnerships between UNDP and UNHCR on the 3RP in the Syria crisis, and to allow for funded complementary development peace interventions in line with the HDP Nexus multi-stakeholder pledge that was announced by UNDP and government of Japan yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I'll give the floor to Mr. Dominique Burgeon, Director at the Food and at the FAO office in Geneva.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. FAO is alarmed by the crisis in Sudan, which has plunged more than 8.6 million people into food crisis in the last year only. As we speak, 15 million people are acutely food insecure, 3.8 million of them one step away from IPC phase 5 catastrophe. On the top of that, 19 million people are currently on the verge of acute food insecurity. So it means 34 million people facing food insecurity as we speak. Because food insecurity and forced displacement are closely linked, addressing food security for displaced people is necessary to lay the groundwork early to create livelihood, build resilience, and achieve solutions. As such, FAO and UNHCR have announced a pledge of a 4-year East Africa regional program prioritizing the Sudan crisis. The program upends the traditional model of short-term humanitarian aid, leveraging UNHCR coordination and protection mandates and FAO's expertise in agricultural production and food system strengthening to promote sustainable livelihoods in cross-border and refugee hosting areas. It employs a nexus approach to promote the economic inclusion of displaced people, natural resource management, and climate change adaptation to foster environmental sustainability and peaceful coexistence. Changing the paradigm of refugee response using proven development approaches is the only way to rebuild the lives of Sudanese IDPs, refugees, returning, and host communities. It's clear that, as was said by previous speakers, We cannot wait until the crisis has passed to begin investing in longer-term solutions. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burgeon. I'll give the floor to Mr. Nicolas Gaisewood, Global Program Manager at the ILO.
Your Excellency, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Global Program Manager of the Prospects Partnership Program at the International Labour Organization. And I'm very pleased to announce that the second phase of the program was confirmed this week by the Netherlands, the donor. And we are pleased that Sudan will remain one of the 8 countries of the program where this is being implemented. And I think it's also important to mention that Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda are also part of that program. We need to keep in mind that we are dealing with mixed movements within the sub-region, including refugees, IDPs, and returnees, for example, to South Sudan. And building on the policy foundations of the IGAD regional frameworks, including the Free Movement Protocol, we need to look at how we can address the needs and expectations of all populations across the socioeconomic spectrum. We will look at how we can leverage the expertise and experience across Prospects countries and identify ways that we can use these technical resources as well as these financial resources strategically and looking at how we can optimize results. And here we should note that the Prospects program aligns with many of the points that have been raised here today. This will mean close examination of supply and demand dynamics of labor markets and business environments, formal and, more importantly, informal. For example, linking skills gaps to development of quality training and active labor market programs, as well as value chain development and the labor-intensive infrastructural development programs. We look forward to exploring these opportunities with government, social partners, UNHCR and UNICEF, and other partners, and optimizing the technical learning from Prospects in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gaisewood. I'll give the floor now to Mr. Umar Silla, Regional Director for Africa, the United Nations Human Settlement Programs, UN Habitat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, allow me to join as a colleague to express our concern and solidarity to the people of Sudan and our regions, but also to magnify our concern about the magnitude of the destruction of housing, land, and property in Sudan and in the vicinity, region. But for us as well, I think it's come from the conversation, we need to think about the root cause of conflict. Of course, we have been investing a lot of money and billions of dollars on humanitarian aid, but are we really touching on the root cause of conflict? And that's where I think the reflection should be today. First things on the root cause of conflict, land and natural resources, which is a cause and one reason of the conflict we are seeing. How to enforce transparency, benefit sharing, how to look into safeguard for community. I know there was a lot of effort at the level of IGLR and IGAD to foster this transparency of natural resources. As a reason of conflict is land, access to land, and territorial conflict and competition we have seen in Darfur. UN Habitat has been working in Darfur for many years on territorial planning and helping communities to recover their property, but at the same time to agree on boundaries. Those are some elements which are fundamental. Another part of its governance, I think it's very important. I'm happy that our colleague of UNDP is here. How to reinforce our collaboration and engagement on strengthening institutions, but also make sure you have participatory and listening, all part of society, and have all society approach on the issue of governance for building a bedrock for economic development, which is fundamental, because without this governance, you go back and forth, and that's what we are seeing is important. Another point is the role of youth. We are in a continent where youth are majority of the population, 60%, less than 30 years old. What we can do with these youth to give them hope, restore hope, give them skills, training, capacity, and to be actors of political development. I think it's very important to listen to the voice of the youth. And I'm happy that on this particular moment, there's some initiative, but we need to reinforce. Another part of it, regional institution, we have seen tremendous work being deployed by ancient IGAD, ICGLR, but I think we need to reinforce the institutions in terms of capacity, in terms of political leverage as well, so that they can contribute to the political dialogue, which is fundamental, because whatever we are doing is political dialogue not taking may be difficult. For us as UN Habitat, we remain committed. I heard some conversation from a distinguished delegate from Chad. What could be the role of the United Nations? Just to give us our support and commitment and continue working with you. As long as local government is concerned, we are working with local government. We are working on the issue of housing. We are looking into the issue of planning area-based to make sure refugees where they are, they have access to decent quality of life, and they have access as well to basic services, to name few. Again, thank you very much, and we are so supportive of your initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Silla. I'll give the floor now to Ms. Hazel Devet, Deputy Director, Office of Emergency Program at the UNICEF office in Geneva. And then the last speaker will be Eskinder Negash of the US Committee for Refugees and Migrants. Hazel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, despite all the challenges we've heard here, UNICEF is staying and delivering its response for children in Sudan. Thereby, we are following a three-pronged strategy in line with the humanitarian development and peace nexus by the following: maintaining critical and life-saving services in hotspot areas, providing urgent assistance to newly displaced and host communities, and ensuring basic service delivery in non-conflict countries. Moreover, in UNICEF, we've been able to reach life-saving services to over 1.4 million people, including children and their families, who are now seeking protection in neighboring countries. To alleviate the crisis and reduce its impact for the long run, localized solutions are key in Sudan. Civil society and local governments have been unmatched as frontline responders to the crisis. Complementing this, UNICEF strengthens national NGO partners and civil society-led emergency response. What we also need is a concerted action together with our international partners. In February 2023, UNICEF and UNHCR have signed a strategic collaboration framework to support more efficient cooperation at the country level and region. The global rollout of this framework will be completed by 2025, while Sudan and the neighboring countries are being prioritized. In the Sudan context, several examples show how cooperation with UN sister agencies, financial institutions, and national governments can complement immediate humanitarian relief with development programs. In Darfur, UNICEF is partnering with WFP, a 4-year joint program funded by the German KfW. The program is boosting social cohesion, inclusion, and conflict resilience. A similar project is being developed in Chad, where UNICEF is partnering with the World Bank and the national government to include host communities into the humanitarian response. The crisis in Sudan is also an education crisis for children. In Egypt, UNICEF is working with the national government to include Sudanese children into the national school system. To conclude, Mr. Chair, while there's promising progress, more efforts and commitments is needed to ensure the inclusion of refugees into national systems. Access to education is particularly crucial for all children everywhere. Therefore, UNICEF calls on both the donors and host community to join hands and connect immediate humanitarian aid with long-term development prospects for children and their families. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel. I now give the floor to Mr. Eskinder Negash, CEO of the US Committee for Refugees and Migrants. Mr. Negash, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a U.S. government representative, or I'm not even from the UN. I wanted to share with you, in case you don't know, that Sudan has been hosting refugees going back to 1961. In fact, we have actually refugees in Sudan since 1968 in the eastern part of Sudan. So Sudan has been really welcoming all the refugees for many, many years. So I felt compelled as a former refugee when I was 17-year-old in Sudan, I felt compelled to speak on behalf of the Sudanese. Sudanese has been, from my perspective, has been a wonderful host so many of refugees from Uganda, from Ethiopia, from Eritrea. So I just wanted to give you a sense. This is really shocking and saddening for a lot of us because Sudan is not really a country of sending refugees. Rather, Sudan has been resettling and accepting refugees. Someone just mentioned that about 3 million IDPs are invisible in Sudan. I hate to say this, but Sudan is invisible. Sudanese are invisible at all. They are not in the media. They are not in National Security Council discussions. Nobody is going to consider, raising Article 99 to talk about Sudan, because let's be honest, not all refugees are equal. Not all human beings are equal. Some are more equal than others. So Sudanese are not going to be in the national media. Sudanese are not going to be discussed at the UN Security Council. So I appreciate all of the things that mentioned here. It's a very nice thing to hear. But Sudan doesn't really need help. What Sudan needs is peace. And I think the United Nations, the Security Council should impose the two parties to come together and solve the problem. If you don't know Sudan, Sudan is the richest country in Africa. So I urge you, and I appreciate the Islamic Bank and others who are doing a wonderful job, but what Sudan needs is peace. And everything we do as a community, we have to really bring Sudan into a peaceful country. And if we do that, you can save a lot of the donor money into another country. So yeah, I feel compelled, even though I wasn't prepared to speak. I asked, she gave me 2 minutes, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me. I believe, again, Sudan needs peace. Sudan needs peace. And of course, finally, Sudan needs peace. Thank you.
No, I would like to thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Negash. Good that you took the floor. I think we've heard it from everybody. Peace, the importance of peace. It was good to hear the efforts that are being made by IGAD to try and bring the two parties to the conflict. We also heard that civilians will also be part of the peace process, and that was a point which I think was raised by the EU. The issue of financing, this is, and it was said just now by Mr. Negash, this is a crisis that is forgotten. It's extremely difficult to mobilize even the humanitarian resources to respond to this crisis. So let's make sure that we continue to mobilize the necessary funding, not just humanitarian, but development. I mean, whether you look at the situation in Chad, you look at the situation in South Sudan, you look at the situation in Egypt, we are talking about not just humanitarian financing, but also development financing. The issue of access, humanitarian access, that remains a problem for those of our colleagues who are working in Sudan. Development must remain engaged, and it was good to hear also from Mr. Yeo Balde the fact that in circumstances where in the past development actors may not have remained active, they do remain active, and that's important to underline. The regional economic consequences of this crisis, you're already seeing that in Central African Republic, in Eastern Chad, everywhere, and that is something that has to be taken into consideration. Integrating refugees in host communities and supporting both host communities and refugees, but integrating refugees in host community rather than separate systems is what we need to ensure. Local actors, they are the ones providing support, providing assistance, providing protection. So they must be at the center of our response as well as host communities. So these are the few points that I've gathered from this very rich discussion. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank the panelists, Ambassador Hassan Hamid of Sudan, Minister Albino Akol from South Sudan, His Excellency Ambassador Jean-Pierre Baptiste from Chad, Ambassador Dr. Gamal Eldin from Egypt, Yero Balde from the African Development Bank, Erika Garnesen from INTPA, Abdi Abdullahi from the Islamic Development Bank, and thanks to all those who did individual intervention. Thank you very much.